Odds are continuing to increase on maybe seeing our next tropical depression or tropical storm Gabrielle in the Atlantic basin pretty soon. It's going to be a slow process, folks, but chances are increasing.
Definitely. Now, it's the area of interest that just moved off of the coast of Africa. That happened over the weekend, and now those odds have been bumped up. Now, this weekend, on Weather Command weekend, we were talking about a low-end chance of development, and now we're in that high category. Odds now up to 70% over the next 7 days. So that just goes to show how dynamic this environment can be and how quickly things can change in regards to the tropics. Now, Britta mentioned this is not going to happen quickly, and notice for the next 2 days that 30% chance is there. So slightly elevated, but still not in that high category. But this storm, a lot of the models are taking a very long time for it to move, not a strong steering current at all.
No, and that means that it can meander. And of course, the weaker it stays, the more that motion of meandering is going to be farther down to the south in that formation zone. So here's a look at visible satellite. We are battling some Saharan dust. That's going to slow this process. You need a lot of moisture to build up thunderstorms, which are really the seedlings of these tropical systems. So it doesn't mean that the dust is going to squash the opportunity, but it's going to hamper it and most likely sort of prolong this process of getting its act together. Now, the weaker the system is, the more it will stay on that westerly trajectory. But the stronger the system is, if this pops to tropical storm strength over the next few days, then it would have a higher potential of recurving to the north, which is eventually where the path goes. The question is when it occurs.
When that happens, yeah. I will say the GFS wants to ramp this development up a lot quicker than the AI. And when I was speaking to a couple meteorologists behind the scenes this weekend, they were telling me that the AI model has actually done the best with genesis of tropical storms so far, if you compare it to
the birth process.
Yes. So if the AI is the better model thus far, granted we've only had 5 storms to compare things off of, then that would mean potentially a weaker storm, and that could mean a little more concerns for spots like the Lesser Antilles. But again, that's really even beyond a 7-day window. We're talking about going into this weekend and early next week.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that this is a small spot. So also these, less organized, smaller spots, they can be harder for the computer models to kind of lock into. I would say that the first step is focusing on what this means for the Caribbean islands, which there's still too many questions to really nail that down. And then you kind of got to stop the conversation there. Past that is even more so out in sort of, crazy territory.
Yes.
So the first step is going to be what's going to be happening this weekend. How close is this really going to get to the Caribbean islands? And both options are still viable at this point.
To your point, Britta, there's going to be so many different things you see online of, hey, look at this, look at what this model's showing.
Don't get too far ahead of yourself.
Right. What we know now is that this will more than likely become our next named storm, that being Gabrielle, but that time frame is still a bit of a question mark here. As things move through, this is going into next Monday, so about a 6-day time frame. Some of the outflow from weaker storms could potentially be not enough to interact with that. So that track is highly dependent on what occurs this week. And so all of these small little changes in evolution we'll keep you updated on. Right now, with our exclusive tropical threat probability, it's showing a 50-60% chance. So with the Fox weather model, that's going in through 9/11. So high chance.
And also it shows, yes, another tropical wave on the heels of this, which is important to point out that that's the direction we're going. A lot more action for the middle, later half of September. All those red L's represent a different computer model simulation of where this could be going. So you can tell that there's still quite a spread. And I always say, when you don't have a beginning spot, you don't have an ending spot. So we can't really get ahead of ourselves too much. But on average, our first G-named storm happens on September 3rd. So we're kind of right in that sweet spot when we would expect to have this type of action. It's exactly where we are sitting right now. I will say, although the computer models are not in complete agreement of where we could be going in this direction tropically, they are completely in agreement of what's happening over the lower 48, which is just as important. All of the computer models are showing a pretty powerful cold front coming across the U.S., which, if down the road we are having a conversation of a system that is getting closer to land, that cold front would be sweeping across, adding in a nice buffer for the lower 48, lowering that potential of maybe seeing some interaction with the U.S. But again, that's way far out there. The first step is what happens with Caribbean islands. The time frame for that would be heading into this weekend, and there's still some big questions on if we could see something or not. So we're all kind of in a wait and see mode to see where things pull together.
Yeah, I mean, just throwing up again those tropical low positions, it's showing you the confidence for the next like 3-4 days, and then that spread becomes so drastic. And whether this thing goes through the Lesser Antilles or heads further north means big implications for the United States even. Well, could we see some tropical moisture? Could we not? There was one model run of the GFS over the weekend that actually was showing a recurve potentially impacting New England. I think that's a very unlikely scenario, but it is just one of the solutions that has popped out through this. Overall, if you look at some of the storms we've had in the form of Dexter, Aaron, they take that high further north and get pulled into the North Atlantic. I think that's something that we should be watching out for. And with a stronger storm, if that does happen within the next 7 days or so, that does seem like that would be a likely solution.
If this ends up being a situation where we have no interaction with the Caribbean islands, we're most likely not going to see interaction with the U.S., considering the cold fronts that are in the forecast for the lower 48. So we'll see how things develop, but definitely looks to be enough to say that we are expecting our next named system, and we'll be tracking it in the days ahead.